I'm Beth Schurman, Partner and Chief Operating Officer with Herspiegel Consulting. I'm joined today by Kate Reedy. We're excited to talk about cell and gene therapy commercialization. Kate, thanks for joining. Would love to hear a bit about your background and experience in the space.
Sure. Thanks so much, Beth. I've been in industry for well over 20 years, spanning across the commercial function in general. My most recent experience was at a small startup organization in gene therapy using lentiviral vector technologies intended to cure specific rare diseases.
Well, thank you. We're really excited to be here today and talk about cell and gene therapy commercialization. To level set, I'd love to get your perspective on the marketplace. We talk about it as advanced therapy. We talk about cell and gene therapy kind of as one conglomerate thing, but there's really a difference in there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Beth. The lexicon is important, especially when you're just defining the market. And so for all intents and purposes, what we think of cell and gene therapy as therapies that are intended to cure disease or intended to significantly modify the disease. And really, I sort of bucket into 4 categories within the cell gene therapy or advanced medicine space itself. So I think about it as far as personalization. Is it autologous approach or is it allogeneic approach? The therapeutic intervention, is it really gene mediated and gene related or immune related? The type, is it regenerative? Is it replacement? Is it silencing? Is it editing? And then sort of the technology and delivery mechanism where the delivery would be either vector or non-viral vector in nature.
Yeah, it's a marketplace with a lot of complexities and certainly differences now from the commercial approach of oral or biologic medicines. How would you characterize the challenges that commercial leaders face in cell and gene therapy, especially thinking about building that go-to-market strategy, and how does it differ from traditional marketing?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a common question. And with the big overarching theme here is that the commercial lens has got to be scrutinized and applied to decision making as early as phase 2, certainly by phase 3, and absolutely before BLA submission. There's a complexity in the process that these decisions are made in, whether it's what sites of care that need to be trained, or what does the manufacturing supply chain really start to look like, and how does that evolve? Those decisions that are made prior to BLA submission are going to absolutely impact your commercial operating model, and also ultimately it'll affect demand generation.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot of launches and we've done it, most traditionally we try and get involved at 18 months, maybe 24 months before a BLA or an NDA. We've done it as short as 3 months. But in the case of cell and gene therapy, it really is that those commercial decisions have to be influenced, have to be part of the clinical program, have to be part of the process, especially with autologous products where the patient is part of the raw material and manufacturing process. Do you have any examples of things that were an aha for you as you were going through that process in your most recent role?
Sure. So one of the big ahas, if you will, was we were really preparing, our organization was preparing for our clinical trial and the scale for our clinical trial to be able to handle the manufacturing and the throughput for our clinical trial. What we really needed to also focus on, and started to when I joined the organization, was to look at it from a larger scale perspective. How are we going to be able to use the same process to implement on a larger scale? Even though it's rare disease, it still needed to be scaled in a much more complex and larger manner. And we weren't thinking like that initially as it relates to just our clinical trials. And that is going to be really important and affect all of the supply chain, the throughput. In fact, there was an article last year in Future Oncology where there is a CAR T for multiple myeloma, And from end to end, it took 177 days for the patient to receive treatment. 46 healthcare providers were involved and 10 sites of care. So you can see the complexity. And so any of these decisions that are made prior to BLA submission, or really prior to phase 3, have got to be looked at and scrutinized from a commercial lens, because it's going to be a different ballpark once you get there.
46 healthcare providers. We've heard and we've seen with some of the work that we've done, a new approach to the field force and having to really reevaluate the kinds of roles, who are the stakeholders that will be customers to engage. What has that looked like for you in your prior role or in talking to colleagues in cell and gene therapy?
Sure. Well, I think that's really an interesting question you asked, because that role in commercial has really never previously existed, right? So when PDUFA date comes, and assume the product is approved, in traditional products, people are generally right out the door, off selling, hitting their targets. The sales force can go to community doctors, to institutional doctors, to key early adopters, all the above. Well, if you're in gene therapy or cell and gene therapy, what's happening is these institutions have to be certified or qualified. They have to have the right capabilities to actually administer the product. And so instead of the PDUFA approval, okay, go sell sort of model that we're used to, we have to do the PDUFA approval. We have to train those sites of care, all of those HCPs that we just discussed, for administering the product. And so there are only so many places that want to do that. And the educational component becomes really, really critical. And that, again, will certainly impact your launch ramp and your launch timing upon approval.
And defining what that certification process looks like. We've also heard from the treatment centers themselves that every product has its own process. So it can be really cumbersome if they're offering multiple products, multiple gene therapies or multiple cell therapies. Everyone is a unique process they have to learn and manage, which is really complex for these centers.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword, actually. So the healthcare treaters or the sites of care have their own process, and manufacturers have our own process separate from each other. Nobody's really creating consistency. And so it gets even more complex as more products get approved.
Yeah, and now competing for clinical trial site access as well as commercial site access. There's a lot of challenges. It's such a new space, advanced medicines. There's challenges to be faced in access and commercial planning and customer engagement. What are some of the ways that commercial leaders can address these new challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, look, a lot of the planning remains very much similar to what we see in traditional marketing, positioning, identifying customer insights, resource allocation, and so on and so forth. But I think what becomes really different is really operationalizing the strategy. So as an example, one of the key components that we just discussed a bit here was the ordering or the manufacturing process for autologous products, where the patient is the source of raw material itself. And so the ordering of that product, which is ultimately comes from the patient, to produce the product, to get to finished goods, to go back into the patient, is a really complex process. So imagine if you're one company and you have one product for a pretty rare condition, genetic or a cell gene therapy, if you will. The doctor has to learn a whole new or healthcare provider office has to learn a whole new set of ordering components. They have to go on to figure out, how do I order this? Where do I get the patient? How are they biopsied? Or how is the blood collected? Where does the packaging happen? Where do I drop it off? And then similarly on the back end, it's all about, when is it delivered? When is revenue recognized here? And how does the patient receive? Is it inpatient? Is it outpatient? And so that's all connected, including that patient services component. It becomes this integrated value chain where manufacturing, supply, commercial, patient services, and even to a lot of extent, finance is really integral to this process.
Well, that is interesting. That leads me, our commercial strategy experts here at Herspiegel Consulting, we typically approach commercial planning through the lens of critical business questions. Our playbook defines the appropriate questions based on the product archetype, the market situation, and time to launch. Do you think teams supporting advanced medicines like cell and gene therapies are looking at a need for different business questions?
Absolutely, yes. I think there's a base foundation of questions, and we kind of established that before, but there is a whole nother set, and I don't even want to say it's a chapter. There are certain components that are going to be inserted into the existing playbook, because the one that exists today is not complete for cell gene therapies. It needs to be expanded, and I think we're still learning on what are all the right business questions that need to be addressed, because I don't think there's one company or one product out there that's done it wonderful the first time, even with the advances we've seen, like from Spark or from Novartis. I think there is much more room for improvement, and those business questions have to be asked and answered, and again, early in the process, not post NDA acceptance. So I think with advanced medicines, and you think about the playbook, the commercial operating model has to align with the identified new or refined key capabilities that the commercial team has aligned to, which there will be new capabilities that are required for each of these commercial teams to go out and execute or really operationalize upon the strategy. And really the way I've approached it in the past and have really thought about it is actually taking the playbook that's currently in view and sort of throwing it out the window and rewriting it. Because I think there are good components there, and certainly already the base foundation of questions, but I think we have to think about it with fresh eyes, and we have to think about it, what are the capabilities that are going to be needed, and incorporate that into our planning for the launch strategy.
How do you see a strategic partner like Herspiegel Consulting helping advanced medicines commercial teams who are in that early commercial or early clinical planning, phase 2, phase 3, or even at the regulatory submission stage?
Well, the first teams that really prepared strategic cell and gene therapies that launched, up to 5 years ago, were really taking business questions as they came, and probably a little bit of dodging and weaving and figuring out, oh, this decision was made, and now we're going to have to execute that way, and thus set expectations appropriately, right? And so now I think there are teams specifically like Herspiegel Consulting that are taking that larger playbook and thinking about it from the bigger perspective and incorporating business questions and solutions for those ahead of time and appropriate and tailored to those specific gene therapy products. And I think in general, especially in this new space, there's so much to learn, and there's a lot of things we know we don't know, but there's also a lot of things we don't know that we don't know. And I think that's where a partner like Herspiegel Consulting really comes in and helps provide their sort of experience with other previous cell and gene therapies that they can also rely on. And so that's where I think having a partner here is really going to be beneficial in the overarching planning for your launch strategy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we've had the great experience to be able to work on a number of cell and gene therapy launches already. And we have gotten in late in some and earlier on others, and that ability to really bring the new business questions and experience earlier to organizations as they're in the planning process is really hopefully the value we can bring to teams. Kate, thank you for your time today. It's been really interesting to learn from you and your experiences. It's such an exciting time for commercial leaders and patients who are gaining access to life-changing and life-saving treatments with the new cell and gene therapies. And with so many in development now, we look forward to the opportunity to help teams commercialize and launch more of these in the future.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for having me.